Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Building Hardy, More Resilient Leaders and Teams. Thank you for joining us. A few logistics today before we get started in order to optimize your audio and visual experience. If you can connect by a computer instead of a handheld device or smartphone, Ethernet connection always will give you the best speed or connection for your web page viewing. Also, if you have headphones available, that can help optimize the audio experience. And if you can, please close any other browsers or applications that you have open at this time. A few logistics before we get started today. Everyone on the line is on mute, so you don't need to worry about the noise around you. No one else will be able to pick that up on the webinar. There are some handouts available for you today as well. So if you look over to the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a question pane, and right above that, you should see a handout section, and there should be 2 PDF documents in there as a takeaway for you today. Also, we welcome your questions as we go through the webinar today. So at any time, if you do have questions, please feel free to type those into the question box there on the right-hand side. We'll compile all of those questions and we'll come back and answer those questions at the end of today's webinar. And also, you can access this recorded webinar through our YouTube channel. So feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see the link there at the bottom of the screen. You can copy and paste that directly into your browser. You'll see a subscribe button there on that page, and then you can actually go ahead and get future recordings or past recordings as well and access different content that we have on our YouTube channel. All right, so for anyone new on the line today, let me just start with a little bit about MHS and who we are. Multi-Health Systems is a global publisher of scientifically validated assessments in the clinical, education, public safety, and talent assessment markets. We are located in Toronto, Canada, and we have been in business for over 30 years. And in the talent space, we are most widely known for our work in emotional intelligence and specifically the EQI 2.0 assessment. But we also do have a diverse toolkit that includes assessments and simulations on leadership, change management, influence, and decision-making, all key or critical steps for any leader, regardless of organization and size. Presenters for today, Dr. Kelly McDonald holds a PhD in social psychology and is a research scientist here at MHS. And Kelly's work at MHS includes leading the development of the Hardiness Resilience Gauge and being an expert on all topics related to resiliency and hardiness. Very excited to have Dr. McDonald here with us today, a great resource for any questions that are going to come up around hardiness and just to give us a really good background on hardiness and how that can help our organizations. Now, in addition to hardiness, Kelly's past research has focused on topics including personality, social interactions, resiliency, and leadership. My name is Jason Rackett, and I am a talent solutions consultant at MHS, and I've worked in the talent management space for almost 20 years. I work with our clients to help them align their organizational objectives with our solution and program offerings. All right, I think that covers off on most of the logistics and the opening. So we're excited to get started. Let me turn that over to Kelly to start telling us more about hardiness.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jason. So before we get into things, let's start off with an example. So I want you to imagine Adam Sullivan, who is an employee at a big organization. And Adam has worked at the same organization for 5 years now, and he experiences a lot of the same things that other employees at organizations face. He is pressured by deadlines, and there are high expectations of him from management. Lately, Adam has felt really burnt out and stressed by his job, often not feeling like he has any control over the types of things he is working on at work. His manager notices that he doesn't seem overly dedicated to his job. He doesn't want to engage in any professional development opportunities, and he is just not bringing the same amount of vigor that he used to bring to his job when he first started at the organization. So, does Adam sound familiar to you? Have you been Adam? Have you worked with someone like Adam? Have you been the leader of someone like Adam? Now think about how someone like Adam has affected you and your work. The types of behaviors that we're seeing from Adam Sullivan are all characteristic of someone who is low in hardiness. And there are a lot of employees out there who feel just like Adam.
Yeah, as you can see, the research indicates that organizations are focusing their attention on how to keep employees healthy, both at work and at home, by investing in wellness programs. And if you look at the data, we're seeing a little bit over 60% of employees are burnt out on the job. We're also seeing that over half of the organizations are wanting to create a culture that promotes wellness, and around 60% of organizations, they offer some sort of wellness program already. So that being said, I'm not sure if all organizations would have the same definition of resiliency. I think this is a good point to stop and see where the audience is at and to find out from you, how would you define resiliency? So that leads us to allowing you to enter your thoughts or definition of resiliency in that question box that I spoke about before. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can type directly into that question box. And again, let us know how you're defining resiliency right now in your organization. Or if you're hearing this for the first time, maybe how you would think resiliency is defined. And we'll give you a minute or two to provide some responses there. Great. So we do see some coming in. We have a couple, maybe 30 more seconds or so for those to show up. And as we're doing that, let's take a look at how we've gone ahead and seen some of those words on our end, or how we've started to define that and see if it matches up. So we thought of things like positive attitude, persistence, determination, strength, flexibility, adaptability, tenacity, durability, stamina. And those are the ones we're seeing. So let's see how that summarizes with what you have.
Yeah, it seems like we're all on the same page. So I'm seeing a lot of ability to bounce back from adversity showing up, perseverance, the ability to face challenges, the ability to process and manage difficulties as they arise. So yeah, everyone seems to be on the same page here with what resiliency is. But let's just all come to one definition here. So resiliency is the ability to recover quickly from adversity and stressful situations. In other words, as you guys have said, it's how quickly you bounce back after you've been knocked down. And so there are a number of different factors that can contribute to how resilient an individual is. There are more external factors, such as a person's social support system, but there are also more internal or inside the skin factors that impact a person's resiliency. And one of the primary internal factors or inside the skin factors that impacts a person's resiliency is their hardiness level. So hardiness is a set of psychological qualities that characterize people who continue to perform well under stressful conditions. Hardiness contributes to a person's resiliency, and simply put, the more hardy a person is, the more resilient they will be. So one way to think about resiliency is as if it were a pie. And there are a number of different pieces that make up a pie, the same way that there are a number of different pieces that make up a person's resiliency level. And so an important piece of the resiliency pie is a person's hardiness level. So a really interesting example where we saw the effects of people's hardiness levels was in research done with the U.S. Army Special Forces. And the Special Forces represent the most elite and demanding of all military specialties, having to quickly adapt and function in small autonomous groups. Candidates undergo multiple rigorous selection procedures, including a highly stressful 4-week selection and assessment course. And on average, only 45 to 55% of candidates succeed in this course. A measure of hardiness was given to approximately 1,100 candidates prior to their completion of the course. And what the researchers found is that candidates who scored higher in hardiness were more likely to successfully complete this 4-week course. So in a course where the demands are high and stress is abundant, those candidates who were higher in hardiness were more likely to be successful. Now imagine how you can take this sort of insight that comes from this research and bring it to your organization. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the qualities that make up a person's hardiness level. So in particular, there are 3 qualities that make up a person's hardiness. The first is challenge, which is seeing change and novelty as exciting and as an opportunity for you to learn and grow. Next is control, which is having a sense of self-efficacy and the belief that you can influence outcomes in your life. And then the final part of the hardiness model is the commitment component, which is being engaged and seeing most parts of your life as interesting and meaningful. So we're going to go into these 3 qualities in a little bit more detail and look at what someone who is higher or lower in these different qualities may look like. But before we do that, it's important to note that these 3 qualities combine to make up a person's total or overall hardiness level. And Jason is going to tell us about an interesting example where total hardiness predicted some pretty high stakes outcomes.
Yeah, this one's really neat. So kind of building on that first example we had when We look at the Norwegian Arctic Border Ranger Selection Course. And as part of the course, it includes a 250-kilometer Arctic ski march, which covers 9 days. Now, failure to complete the march means that they fail the course. And the hardiness assessment was administered at the beginning of the march. Only 44% of people completed the course. And those border rangers who had higher total hardiness were more likely to be among those that actually successfully completed the march. So as we're thinking about these two examples, of course, extreme circumstances, but if hardiness is showing that in those cases, imagine what that can do for you and your organization at something like a frontline leadership level or a mid-level manager.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go through the 3 C's. So we're going to start with challenge. And challenge is all about how well you deal with change and how you react and interpret failure. And so people who have difficulty with challenge may see little value in novelty, and they may be reluctant to embrace change. These are people who prefer the status quo and don't see any real purpose in changing things. People who struggle with challenge may see failure as confirmation of personal weakness, and so they see very little value in failure. So when something doesn't go the way that they planned, they just want to move on, leave the mistake in the past, not reflect on it, or attempt to learn anything from it. In contrast, someone who has a strong sense of challenge will enthusiastically embrace change. They're open and curious and willing to try new things. And when something new comes their way, they are willing to jump in with both feet and give it a try, often making them quite flexible across situations. People who have a strong sense of challenge often see failure as a chance to learn and improve. So failure is not something to be feared. It is something to be embraced and learned from.
Yeah, and when we think of challenge, a great example here is what we see with Amazon and Jeff Bezos and how he's inspired people in his organization to change the way they think about failure. Bezos promoted the mindset within the organization that failure is acceptable and it's expected, and there's an opportunity to learn from both success and failures. So having this perspective really encourages his employees to try new things, to be flexible, and to really see the value in failing, which is all important aspects of hardiness. He's even been quoted as saying, failure comes part and parcel with invention. It's not optional. We understand that, and we believe in failing early and iterating until we get it right. So I think that's a good example there of challenge. Let's move on to looking at control.
Sounds good. So the second quality is control. And control captures how strongly someone believes that they can control or influence the outcomes in their life. Someone who struggles with control believes that there is little that they can do to influence their life outcomes, and they're often fearful about an uncertain future. People who struggle with control feel powerless when unexpected things happen, and they're often quite overwhelmed by stressful situations. When something stressful does happen, people who struggle with control are likely to be the ones that throw their hands in the air and take the attitude of, well, it doesn't really matter what I do because nothing I can do can help me regain control in this situation. In contrast, someone who has a strong sense of control believes that they can influence their life outcomes, and they're willing to make choices and accept responsibility for those choices. They believe that they can manage their environments even when stressful or unexpected changes occur. So when something stressful does happen, people high in control instantly jump into action and tackle the stressful problem head on.
Yeah, a few years ago now, there's an example here where on the East Coast, they were faced with a deadly ice storm. And we're seeing that now with the seasons changing and we all travel. So I think we can relate to this. But, at the time, the founder for JetBlue, David Neeleman, was forced to cancel over 1,000 flights due to that weather event. And because of JetBlue's strict policy of never canceling flights, they immediately faced backlash and frustration from their customers, as you might imagine. So what David did was he quickly responded to the stressful situation and immediately took action to address the customer's concerns. So he wrote a public letter of apology, even created a customer's bill of rights, and then he outlined how the affected customers would be compensated. So I think Neeleman's display of hardiness in this situation is by how he really addressed that head on, and he transformed this into a manageable event that the company was actually able to recover from. So now that we have an example of commitment, let's go, or control, sorry, let's go to that last C, commitment.
Sounds good. So commitment is about being engaged and seeing parts of your life as interesting and meaningful. And so for someone who struggles with commitment, they may not have a strong sense of purpose in their life. They may have trouble getting excited about day-to-day activities, and they may not be overly curious or interested in what is going on in the world around them or their social relationships. So people who struggle with control may appear to be quite unmotivated, or as if they're simply just sitting back and letting life pass them by. In contrast, someone who has a strong sense of commitment believes they have a purpose in their life, and they see their day-to-day activities being just as meaningful and important as the big life goals or events that they're working towards. They bring a sense of dedication and vigor to most things that they do, and they're attentive and in tune with the world around them, which allows them to remain grounded and make realistic assessments of stressful situations. So people who have a strong sense of commitment strive to reach their full potential, and they use their passion to fuel them in both their personal and professional life.
Yeah, and I think a great example here to think about when we think about commitment is Sheryl Sandberg, and great leader in the technology space, and then personal tragedy happens to strike. Loss of her husband, has children, has to still maintain the family life, but also still maintaining to be a leader in the technology space and holding high level positions and really driving that industry forward while still being committed to a family. So I think a great example of how someone shows commitment there, and really how to strive forward when we're thinking about hardiness.
For sure, and thinking about the passion that she must have in order to drive her forward through those difficult situations. Okay, so hopefully we all have an understanding now of what hardiness is, but let's dig a little bit deeper into why hardiness matters, particularly for employees and organizations. So simply put, hardy employees are better employees. They're more satisfied with their jobs, they experience less burnout, and they take fewer days off due to stress-related illnesses. Hardy employees are also great for the culture of an organization. They're innovative, dedicated, flexible, and they have good working relationships with their coworkers. They're active participants in their organization. So when you really think about it, who wouldn't want an employee who embraces change, feels in control, and is passionate and committed to what they're doing? Hardiness also relates to people's leadership abilities. Hardy leaders are more effective leaders. They're inspirational, and they tend to promote cohesion in their team members. We'll come back to the topic of hardiness and leadership a little later in the webinar, but for now, it should be quite clear that hardy employees are desirable employees for any organization. And so if we're talking about what hardy employees look like, it's also important to talk about what employees who need to develop their hardiness skills or non-hardy employees look like. These are going to be employees who are unsatisfied. They're unmotivated, they lack passion, they're inflexible, they feel out of control. These are employees who look like Adam Sullivan from our opening example, burnt out and ultimately a less effective employee. Jason, I'm sure in your consulting experience, you've come across organizations or employees that seem to be struggling with hardiness.
Yeah, of course, we've seen that a couple times. A few examples that I can highlight are one where we're seeing this within doctors and their residency programs. So those first couple of years when they're in a new space, obviously they have the cognitive ability, they have the technical skill, they've gone on through all the schooling necessary, but now they're put into an environment where they have to deal with colleagues, they have to deal with supervisors, and most importantly, they have to deal with patients and patient satisfaction and how they interact that way. And so that's where they're seeing a struggle right now, is in that residency program, and using hardiness as a way to identify who are those hardy individuals versus who are those that we can maybe work with and potentially help develop as they move forward in their career. And then I would say the second example is within the technology space. What we're seeing here is these great minds where people, again, back to the cognitive ability, right? They're great coders, or they can have this vision for software. And how can this new software be used and implemented to help people or help situations? But where the struggle comes in is that they've kind of been on their own before, right? They have these great ideas, they could code it and move on. But now in a large organization, how do I take a team of people and I'll get them moving in the same direction? How do I align organizational goals and objectives and communicate that when before I'd been working on my own, it was my idea and I could cultivate that, without any interaction. So again, that's where we're seeing that hardiness component come in again, is how do I work with other people? How do I sift through that when it's something new to me? So I think those are two examples that we can highlight at this time. All right. Now, after a couple examples, I want to see that we've given, where would you maybe see the hardiness fitting into your organization? We're going to start with a poll here. We've launched the poll, so you're seeing that on your screen. The options there being leadership development, addressing burnout, selection and onboarding, and succession planning. So we'll give you a couple seconds to go ahead and make your selection there, and then we'll summarize and we'll see where we're at for that. All right, definitely a lot of people still responding. We'll give maybe 10 more seconds here. Still seeing some numbers come in. Obviously, leadership development seems to be pretty popular there, but addressing burnout's pretty close. So let's go ahead and close the poll at this time, and we'll share those results with everyone. All right, yeah, so we kind of landed right there. Look at that, 50% right on leadership development, 33% addressing burnout, 10% selection and onboarding, and 7% succession planning. So great examples there. We'll talk more about where we see that being applied.
For sure. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take a closer look at MHS's new assessment, the Hardiness Resilience Gauge, which is a tool that will allow you to have a meaningful conversation with people about hardiness. And so before we go too much into detail about the Hardiness Resilience Gauge, or the HRG, I think it's important to highlight the history behind this tool. This assessment has over 30 years of research and development behind it. A leading researcher in this field, Dr. Paul Bartone, began his work researching hardiness in the 1980s. Over the next few decades, Dr. Bartone, while working as a U.S. Army research psychologist, developed and refined an assessment of hardiness called the Dispositional Resilience Scale, or the DRS. Over the years, this scale progressed to be a brief yet comprehensive measure of hardiness. And the DRS has a long history of successful use with various samples, including employees, military personnel, law enforcement, healthcare personnel, and students. In 2018, the DRS underwent further development, evolving into the Hardiness Resilience Gauge. So there's a long history behind this tool. So the HRG report that accompanies the assessment was designed to be straightforward. You can find a sample report in the handout section, and we're not going to go over the entire report today, but I will give you a couple of highlights. So first, the report was designed to give your client lots of strategies for development. In the report, your client will receive feedback about their total hardiness score, as well as their challenge, control, and commitment scores. Your client will be given detailed interpretive information about what each of these scores mean, and they'll also be given strategies that they can use to develop their challenge, control, and commitment scores. So if we take a look at the challenge page, for example, at the bottom of the page, the report displays 3 strategies you can highlight for your client to use to develop their challenge score. These strategies were designed to be straightforward and action-oriented so that your client can immediately start implementing them in their lives. So within the HRG report, strategies for development are also given to your client for developing their control and their commitment. Another highlight from the report is the Balancing Your Hardiness page. On this page, your client will receive feedback about whether their hardiness profile is balanced or imbalanced. But why do we care if a person's hardiness profile is balanced or not? Well, we know that hardiness works best as a protective factor when all scores are in the mid to high range and are balanced with one another. Imbalances in an individual's profile can impact their day-to-day behaviors and how they approach situations. And I can tell you from the debriefs that I've done with people using the Hardiness Resilience Gauge that the balancing part of the report is where it really comes together for the client. And some trainers who have been using the HRG also indicate that it's the Balancing Your Hardiness section where people have a lot of key takeaways and they can easily see the impact of imbalances on their life. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of imbalances. So if your client's challenge score outweighs their commitment score, that is, their challenge score is substantially higher than their commitment score, it means that your client's motivation to try new things may outweigh their motivation to invest energy into meaningful experiences. This could mean that they waste time and energy engaging in activities simply because they're new, not because they're purposeful or meaningful. And so it's important to note that for many people, imbalances could have had a positive effect on their life, and it may have gotten them to where they are today in their career. And I think that's where your value and insight can come in as a coach in helping them realize that what may have gotten them to where they are now might not always work for them. And you can point out the potential risks of imbalances to them.
Yeah, I think we can all relate maybe to employees we've seen that are really eager to try new things, and they'll skip from task to task or even from job to job, but they don't necessarily remain committed to a task or seem passionate about what they are doing. I know just personally an example I'm thinking of is a friend I know that has had a couple different careers. So a school teacher, a police officer, and now working in organizational development. So that's 3 careers right there where most of us will have just maybe 1, maybe 2. So I think that's a good example of where we're seeing that challenge outweigh commitment in some way in that example.
For sure. And I think it's also a good example of where the imbalance is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So perhaps that was really good for your friend because ultimately it got them to their passion. But pointing out this imbalance to them and how they might see it in other areas in their life, or if they continue to try and change careers, you could point out that that is going to be potentially problematic for them. So another example we have is if your control score outweighs your challenge score. So if your client's control score is substantially higher than their challenge score, it means that their motivation to control and influence outcomes in their life is higher than their motivation to try new things. Clients who display this imbalance may only engage in new activities if they feel like they can control the outcome of them.
Yeah, maybe even something like today, Kelly,
Yes.
for me personally. I know that sometimes it can be something I struggle with because, on the control part, I have to use a lot of video, audio messaging that goes out to our potential clients and to our current clients. But I can't always control how that message is going to be received by them, although we do the best to prepare it. But that always is a fear, I guess, sometimes that I can have is to maybe having to redo that multiple times, going back and forth. So for myself personally, I can share that that's where I see control, sometimes outweighing that challenge for me in that example.
For sure. That's a great example. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to highlight for you from the report is the Hardiness and Leadership report page. And on this page, your client will be presented with the LEAD model, which gives strategies that leaders can use to increase hardiness in their team members. A lot of the research that has been done on hardiness and leadership has come out of Dr. Paul Bertone's military research. And military leadership principles have been linked quite closely to corporate leadership principles. And if we think of military leadership as a process where leaders are influencing others to accomplish the mission by providing a purpose, direction, and motivation, there are definitely parallels that can be drawn to corporate leadership, where leaders are also attempting to influence, motivate, and provide direction for their team members. So we can definitely take some of the learnings from military research on hardiness and leadership and apply them in organizations. So let's talk a little bit about what leaders can do to foster hardiness in others. So leaders are in this unique position of being able to influence their team members, and there are actions leaders can take to build hardiness in their teams. Leaders can build challenge by treating failure as a chance to learn. Address setbacks and failures within your team and frame them as opportunities to learn. Linking it back to our conversation about Jeff Bezos, the Amazon CEO, he has created a culture at Amazon where it is okay to fail, and it's seen as a necessary part of innovation. So I've seen him quoted as saying Amazon has billions of dollars in failure. So taking the perspective as a leader that failure is okay sends the message to his team members that it's okay to fail and there are lessons learned, ultimately helping them build their challenge. Leaders can build control by providing tasks that are challenging, but within employees' capabilities. As a leader, it's important to challenge your team members, but it's also important to provide them with the resources for that challenging task so they can continue to feel as if they are in control of what they're doing. And finally, leaders can build commitment by giving recognition, awards, and praise for accomplishments. This will help increase team members' sense of purpose and the meaning that they have with their work, ultimately increasing their commitment.
Yeah, and like you said, we talked about the challenge before at Amazon and how they foster that, but the one that jumped out for me here is the control example. And when I think of that, I was recently watching a television show where they're talking about SpaceX. And now I didn't know that the mission really of SpaceX is to create reusable rockets that they can use to foster potentially life on Mars. So the challenge here and control piece comes in where we're saying, at least for Elon Musk, I know this is possible. And he's telling all of his employees, now it's up to you to figure out how we create reusable rockets, how we land them on a tiny launch pad so we can send them back into orbit. And then, oh yeah, how do we create sustainable life on Mars? All right, everybody go with that. So yeah, I mean, he's really putting a lot of control on his employees there to carry that vision forward. And he's saying, I know we can do this. I know we can achieve it. I'm just not exactly sure how. So that's where the employees have to pick up that piece. But he's really fostered that within the organization.
For sure. So providing that challenging task, but he knows that his employees can do it, and he's willing to give them the time and resources to be able to do that. That's a great example. So in the same way that leaders can build hardiness in their team members, they can also diminish it. So for example, employees' challenge can be diminished by restricting innovation and experimentation and requiring rules and permission for everything. If an employee feels like they need permission to do everything, they are not going to be motivated to try new things or be innovative. A leader who does this is also sending the message that failure is not welcome or acceptable. A leader can diminish control by assigning too many tasks for the time available. And when an employee feels like they have too many things to do without enough time or resources, they're going to feel like they have very little influence over what they're doing or the direction of their projects. And as a final example, not providing workers with information about the missions and goals of the organization can diminish their commitment. If an employee does not know why they are doing what they are doing or how their work fits into the larger goals and vision of the organization, they're going to have a hard time getting excited about their work and finding meaning in it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to those two examples we talked about earlier with the Special Forces units, the Arctic Border Rangers, guessing that they don't always get all the information they need to carry out their mission, but their commitment level has to be high enough to get through that piece of it. So, maybe we're dropping you here. You have 9 days to get to this point for pickup. You know the overall mission, but what happens in between there, you're going to have to figure out as you go. So that's where I think we're really seeing someone there having to have that high level of commitment, but balancing against how it can be diminished by not having all that information from leaders.
For sure.
All right, so we talked about what is hardiness. So where is it maybe applicable within the organization and at what levels? But now what if I want to implement hardiness, within my own organization? We see this being as not just a standalone tool. It can be that, but it can also be integrated with other programs that you have. Like, for example, maybe you use some of our other tools like the EQI 2.0 or the change style indicator. So the Hardiness Resilience Gauge can actually be used to create an assessment battery that you can now expand that look into leadership development when you're working with your employees. And we wouldn't say that's restricted in any way to a specific job title or job function or even industry. I think as we've talked about today, that can really span different industries, job functions, really anywhere that you see employees using that leadership and needing a way to know, well, how can I work through situations in my organization? And if I wanted to bring the Hardiness Resilience Gauge to my organization, there's 2 ways I can go about doing that. I can, for one, get certified in the assessment. And what a certification process might look like is that you take some learning modules. There's 2 learning modules that you'd go through. You'd also take the assessment yourself. And then you'd have a 1-hour coaching call with a master trainer who would help you work through the results. And then you can use that time also to ask questions, talk about best practices. So if I'm going to be the key stakeholder in my organization, what's the best way to roll that out? You can ask the trainer that, someone who's done that already. Now, in addition to that, you'll also have access to PowerPoint slides that talk about the model, sample reports, and a facilitator's guide that you can reference as well. Now, a second option there, if you weren't able to be that key stakeholder and lead that program internally, you can work with MHS through our OD Solutions group, and we can help you with a program like that. An example of that could be where you have individuals take the assessment. They'd each get their own report. And then we can have a facilitator meet with that group to help them understand what is the model around the Hardiness Resilience Gauge? How does this show up in our organization? Why is that important to me? And then how can we create a plan to either increase hardiness levels or look at either challenge, control, or commitment? Which one of those would I need to focus on as an individual? So those are two different ways you can go about bringing that to your organization. Also, we will have this webinar available for future use. If you want to, again, you can look at our YouTube channel. You see the address at the bottom of the screen. You can go ahead and copy and paste that address right into your browser. It'll take you there and you'll see the subscribe button. We encourage you to subscribe there and learn about not just today's content, but you'll see past content there as well, and you can check back for future content also. All right, so if you've decided that you want to look more into hardiness, you think that's applicable in your organization, any of the Talent Solutions consultants you see listed on screen right now can help you with that. They can help provide more information, give you sample reports, talk more about hardiness as well. So you will see the corresponding state matched with the name there. And then for any of our international attendees, you can contact Angelica as referenced at the bottom of the screen there. All right, so I think we've talked a lot today about hardiness and that, and we've had a bunch of questions come in. So we're going to turn over our time, the rest of the time here, to answering some of those questions. All right, so we're looking at a couple of these here, Kelly. There's a bunch here. I think maybe a good place to start is maybe around if I'm a coach or someone that's looking at results and they're not balanced. So we talked a little bit about that before, the importance of the balance. Now, should I focus on the qualities, where one quality over another, or which one's more important in that situation?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what the imbalance is. So if a challenge score is a lot higher than the commitment score, well, then probably the focus should be on bringing up that person's commitment score to be in balance with the challenge score. But I think it's important to have that conversation with the client to try and figure out, well, is this a downfall in their life? Kind of, are they having negative implications as a result of this? And figure out what is the best strategy with them. But in general, we would recommend putting time into developing the trait that needs more developing to bring it in line with the higher score.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, and I think that builds on another question I'm seeing here too, which we're going a little level up now. So not just the individual, but in an organization. So I'm kind of paraphrasing a question that came in, but it's more around the lines of how can organizations promote and foster hardiness and build this for perpetuity?
I love this question. And the way that I think about it, there's kind of two ways that hardiness can be facilitated in an organization. And so the one way we've kind of addressed today, where leaders can take actions to instill hardiness in their employees by kind of debriefing around failures and providing kind of resources if things are really constrained and they have a big project, something like that. So those are that's one way that you can increase hardiness in people in an organization. But I think the other way, which we didn't really touch on today that much, is by being a hardy leader yourself. So we know with hardiness that there's this trickle-down effect, and that as a leader, if you are a hardy leader, you are going to have hardy employees as well. So even just by being a hardy leader and displaying hardiness and teaching your team this is how we deal with stressful events, your employees are also going to become more hardy as well, kind of promoting this entire culture of hardiness.
Okay. Great. Good response there. That's a great question. Like you said, some more we're seeing come in here would be around maybe now someone here is familiar with our other tools. So they're asking, will we create a day program or a workshop type program that's aligned with the emotionally effective leader? Something that's along those lines of a facilitator guide, or how can I bring that as a leader into my organization with all of that content already put together? So thank you for that. We will, of course, look into doing that like we do for all of our content. I would say, though, that we did mention the PowerPoint that you get as part of your certification process. So that may not be a ready to roll out workshop, but for you as a key stakeholder, that's going to have a lot of the content that you need there around the modeling. What is hardiness? Why is it important? That you could repurpose and share with your group as well. So I'd say you're kind of halfway there already with some of that being available to you.
And I'll just jump in here too, Jason. With the certification, you do get access to a facilitator guide. And so similar to what you were just saying, it will work nicely with the PowerPoint slides. And there are some additional activities in there that you can use to help develop hardiness in teams and such.
Sure. Yeah. And then, of course, if you wanted to look at that at a team or department level, you can, of course, do that as well by using those reports to look at that. All right. A couple other questions to look at here as we go through. Let's see. How does the gauge distinguish between someone who feels unable to influence outcomes versus when they're in a situation when they actually can't? Or how does that conversation with the client happen if they aren't able to articulate it?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question. And one way I like to always start a debrief is asking someone about the most recent stressful experience that they've encountered. And that can range from a car accident to an illness to a really stressful project at work. There's a whole range of stressful circumstances that people bring up. And as they're describing that, you get a sense of what their hardiness levels are. And so typically, they may describe it as, say, I was in a car accident and it was completely out of my control. Well, instantly you kind of get this reaction that their control score might be a little bit lower because they didn't feel like they could control the outcome of that situation or kind of regain control in that situation. So I think by starting debriefs with that question of tell me about a time you had a stressful experience, you can get a sense from them kind of whether they feel unable to influence outcomes and how that actually translates into how they handle stressful situations.
Good example there. And that actually, I think, helps lead into another question we're seeing here, whereas you're saying I hear many emotional intelligence skills and competencies embedded in the 3 C's. How would you see a coach using this with an organizational client? So, yeah, I mean, obviously tie in over here. So when we think about things like self-regard or stress management, right? Stress tolerance, how optimistic are we about things? That is leading into control, right? How much can I control versus I can't? The challenge part, how my interpersonal skills, my decision-making, how does that lead into my challenge? Where can a line be drawn there to see if those are in balance, as we've been talking about balance, but now across assessments, not within just the same one. So there's absolutely tie-in there. And that's why we were saying before too, you could see that being used as an assessment battery almost, where we're getting now a full picture of someone's development potential, perhaps by using multiple assessments to make those highlights like you called out. All right, let's see a couple more here. Can you use the hardiness guide in the hiring process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think it could be very informative in the hiring process for identifying employees who might be particularly vulnerable to experience stress related issues, or for people who are going to be really kind of resilient in the face of stressful situations. But it should not be the only piece that is used within the hiring process. So we would recommend it kind of being related back to the pie analogy, a piece of the pie that which you are using when you are hiring somebody.
Yeah, and that's something we can help with again too there through our OD Solutions group. If you wanted to look into that, we can do a validation study that will show, are we seeing hardiness scores that are in relation to performance scores? So definitely something we can help you look at. All right, a couple more questions here. We're seeing, is there going to be a coach report? So those of us who are familiar with the EQI and some of our other assessments, right now we don't have a coach report aligned with the hardiness report that's there. We think that the information that's in that challenge, control, and commitment scores are something you can work through with the clients, but we'll take that into consideration. So thank you for asking that. And another question coming in, does this assessment demand a debrief, or can the results be given to a client without meeting with a coach? I'll take this one, Kelly. I would say absolutely a debrief is needed. A lot of times participants, they don't know those 3 C's. They haven't taken the learning modules, obviously, so they don't understand the modeling around that and what the report's trying to tell them. So they'll just see some scores and they'll be able to make some sort of reference to that. But again, that would be great for the individual who is certified to really draw a line to how that can help them in their current role or in their organization and how they can use that to become a better manager or leader. All right, a couple more. Here's a good one. How often should the resilience gauge be administered? Every month, every 3 months? Can it track hardiness growth of an employee before and after the employee receives some intervention from the organization?
So that is an awesome question. So the thing with hardiness is that everyone kind of has their set point at which they are comfortable. So if I were to administer the hardiness to you, Jason, today, and I administered it to you kind of a couple weeks from now, your levels are probably going to be fairly similar. But if you were to engage in a developmental program or put effort into perhaps developing your challenge score, your control score, then we would expect to see that growth. So I don't know how important it is to define kind of the time frame between administrations, but we would expect it to be developed and change if there's a specific intervention that targets someone's hardiness skills.
Okay, good. And then I'm seeing a follow-up kind of to that with building on the OD Solutions group. Someone's asking, how can I bring this assessment to my organization, or how would the OD Solutions team do that? So the way we go about doing that is to, obviously we have the model, we have the assessment, but what we like to do is try and align that with specific organizational goals or challenges that you have. We're then refining what that conversation will look like once everyone's taken the assessment, gotten their results. That's where we come in to help you say, now, why does this matter for me at work? How can I use this as an individual here and, in company A to make us better? How can I be a better leader by doing that? So we'll work through that with you to help understand the process, but also part of that comes on the delivery of when we're talking about the action steps, right? We all as a group then, if we're, let's say a finance team, how are we as finance using hardiness? What does that mean to us? And we're talking through that as a group and creating those action plans as well. And then ODS can help with the individual feedback. So maybe we want to do one-to-one feedback on top of that group feedback that we're doing as well. So a couple examples there. Hopefully that answers the question. All right. I think as we're going through this too, Kelly, we're answering a lot of questions, but we haven't said when is this going to launch. So go ahead. Tell us when that's going to be ready.
So the Hardiness Resilience Gauge will be launching this upcoming Monday on November 19th. So for those of you who are already on the No MHS, you can get in contact with your partner relations consultant and customer service and go from there. But you will have access to these, and the appropriate people will have all of the information that you need on November 19th, this upcoming Monday.
Okay, and a quick follow-up to that one. How long should it take for someone to complete the HRG?
So it's a really quick assessment. It would typically take about 5 to 10 minutes for somebody to complete.
Great. Nice. All right. I think that fits well, like we said, within other programs that are there, or as a standalone, it can move quickly.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. So we thank you all for joining us today. We appreciated having the time to talk with you. We have some other questions that we can't always get to, but please feel free to contact the Talent Solutions consultants that you see on screen for any additional questions you have or requests for information, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation that way. So thank you once again, and everyone have a great rest of the day.